right, we are live on YouTube. Are we recording? We are. All right. Welcome everyone to this planning board meeting. I just got the pop-up saying now we are being recorded, so now we are legitimately being recorded. Thank you everyone for coming to the planning board meeting tonight. I appreciate you coming out. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have our planning board agenda set out, so we're going to go ahead and start with number 1, call to order and confirmation of quorum. So Margaret, if we could go ahead and get that confirmation.
Yes, let me just do a quick roll call. Chris Austin, do not see him on the screen. Frank Casadante.
Here.
Lisa Frazier.
Present.
Chris Johnston.
Present.
Jeff Scott.
Present.
Hooper Schultz.
Here.
And Jen Sykes said she would not be able to be here, as did Elise Polly and Scott Taylor.
Present.
That is a quorum. 6 members are sufficient.
Perfect. It's great to see you all. We'll go ahead and move number 2, agenda changes and approval. Margaret, I know you sent an update to the agenda. If we could go ahead and discuss that real quick or update it.
Yes, I sent additional examples of apartments, but that's part of 4A. The actual addition is whether if the board could consider sending an additional text amendment to public hearing for emergency administrative certificates of occupancy that would only ever come up in the case of a state declared emergency. So like in the case, probably not a pandemic because it does allow for remote meetings, but much more likely a hurricane or tornado when there's damages to properties where the commission would normally meet, but we might not be able to get an emergency meeting together to handle necessary repairs that might not be able to be approved as minor works or something else like that. So this is just a text amendment that is being recommended by the folks who prepared the updates to the historic district design standards and is recommended by the state. So we'd like to get that in the ordinance sooner than later. And all the members should have received that by email earlier today.
Okay. I hope everyone has a chance to review that. Does anyone have any questions? Margaret, you actually already clarified for me because my question was, is it pandemic related? It didn't seem likely because everyone's meeting by Zoom anyway. So, but good to clarify. Okay, does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about that? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. I'm not seeing anyone jump up and down or anything like that to get a word in. Okay. So Margaret, per the agenda change, we're sending it to?
It would be a motion to send it to public hearing. And if you wanted to add it as either before we get to 4A, there should just be a motion to amend the agenda to add it to the agenda rather than actually acting on it right this second.
Gotcha.
I'll move to send that to agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Lisa.
All right, so I've got a motion from Hooper and a second from Lisa. Frank's going to get it next time. And we're going to put that as 4.5. Put it just above A, so we can go ahead and knock that out, and then we can concentrate on A. So let's go ahead and have a quick roll call on that one.
Frank Casadante? Frank? Motion on the, oh, he seems to be frozen. I'll start at the other end of the agenda, or alphabet. Scott Taylor?
Aye.
Hooper Schultz?
Aye.
Jeff Scott?
Aye.
Chris Johnston?
Aye.
Frank Casadante? I saw his lips move, so I'm going to say that. There we go.
There we go.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Perfect. And then.
Oh, Lisa, I'm sorry. I forgot. Somehow I forgot Lisa. I don't know how.
Aye.
Thank you.
She seconded. It's one of those things where we assume, but. And then I do apologize for our two guests at the moment. I should have introduced you first before we started talking business, and I was just so excited to get 4.5 on the board that I completely skipped over it. So we have 2 applicants for the opening on the ETJ for the board. We have Saru Salvi here tonight, and if I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. And then Bob DeCorsia. Did I get that right? Thumbs up? Wonderful, great. So we have them both here looking on while we discuss the planning board meeting, and I really appreciate you both being here. And if anything comes up, definitely let us know. Do we want to do, where's Shannon? Shannon, there you are, sorry. Do we want to do anything beyond that, or?
You're the chair, you're the boss.
Oh, geez, that's a big mistake.
Well, let's just quickly, I mean, I want to be able to get to our items, but quickly, if we could have Saru just introduce yourself and tell the board a little bit about yourself, and then we'll do that with Bob too, and then we can move into our business items.
So I live outside the town limits, and I have been in Hillsborough since 2004. Before that, I came to North Carolina in 1986 or 87. And I am retired recently as of May. So I have started committing myself to some town items and others. I am on the board of the advisory board for the water and sewer, so this really goes hand in hand with that. What else can I tell you?
That's absolutely perfect, if you want to leave it at that.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you, Sarah. Bob?
Hi, everyone. Bob DeCorsia. I moved to Hillsborough 15 years ago, actually this week, when my company relocated to Durham. I've been with that company for 40 years, and like Saru, I recently retired in February. And then I met with Chris and Shannon. I love Hillsborough. I love its small town charm. And I'm just interested in hearing more about what you guys do and the purpose of the advisory board. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. Bob, Saru, thank you so much. And like I said, we really appreciate you joining us for this. With that, let's go ahead and move into 3 minutes review and approval. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Any questions, changes, punctuation, grammar, any of it? Okay. Everyone sounds great. Okay, with that, we need to approve the minutes. And if we could get a first and a second there.
Motion to approve.
Scott?
Second.
There it is, Frank. Okay, Frank's got the second.
Okay, Frank Casadante,
Frozen again.
again, okay. Scott Taylor,
Aye.
Cooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Lisa Frazier,
Aye.
and Frank still appears to be frozen.
I think we do need him.
Well, he isn't formally excused, so it's still a unanimous vote of everybody present. We'll see how quickly he comes back, and maybe put him on the spot and ask him specially to vote.
Okay. It looks like he fell out now.
Looks like he's going to be back.
Okay. All right. Well, while we wait for Frank, I believe we are now on 4.5, which is review of the emergency ordinance. And let's see here. No, I had it. I swear I had it up. The emergency administrative certificates of appropriateness. Margaret, do you want to just give us a very brief overview of what this is and why we need it?
Sure. I'm going to back up a little bit first, though, for our visitors and say that, I think everybody's familiar with the fact that we have a development ordinance. And then anytime there wants to be an amendment to the text, someone has to vote to send that to public hearing. Staff just can't put something forward. And now an applicant can apply, but that's very rare. But it's primarily the planning board that votes to send text amendments forward The town board can also do it, as can the Board of Adjustment. So this is sort of a request from the Historic District Commission. They are the board that issues certificates of appropriateness for exterior changes in the historic district. And this was recommended by the state as we were updating the design standards, that occasionally you're going to run into a situation where there is damage to properties in the case of an emergency, and there will not be time to schedule a meeting where the commission can meet. It may not be possible to get the commission to meet, or without leaving the building exposed for a significant period of time. And again, we are talking about historic structures that are important to us, that we want to preserve. So weather getting into them is bad. They are meant to be enclosed. And so this process lays out conditions under which staff would be granted more approval authority in a short period of time. And then the commission would act on the applications after kind of the emergency is a little bit better. It does require that it be a declared emergency, and at the state level, or that the state has caused an emergency locally, and that there's an issue with getting a in-person or remote meeting in, and we are required to have 48 hours notice for even emergency meetings. So I'm not sure how often this would come up. It should be fairly rare. I don't ever remember this being an issue, even with tornadoes and hurricanes over 30 years, but I guess it's possible. And it's just a recommended procedure to have this in the ordinance so that things could move forward and not expose the structures to prolonged delays in repairs, simply to them being in the historic district.
Okay. Do we have any questions, any comments, concerns? Margaret, so this isn't in relation to any particular event. This is just a CYA for the.
Exactly. It's to catch us so that hopefully we are prepared if it ever comes up. We have no pending emergencies that we are trying to protect against.
Okay. Does anyone on the board have any questions, concerns? Pretty straightforward. Okay. So one last question, Margaret, in regards to this being added to the agenda packet or anything along those lines. Is this going to be added to the agenda packet for our folks at home or anything along those lines for historical purposes, or is it just going to get kicked up to or referenced when it gets sent to the next step?
It was emailed to all of the members, so they all received it, which is what's required for public notice by the state laws, that if there's some handout or change to an agenda, all of the board members need to have received it before the meeting. Okay. So it was sent to everyone
in terms
today,
of our friends
so
at home.
everybody has it. If the board votes to send it to public hearing, it will then be available in the joint public hearing packet and be available for the public to review at that point.
Okay, wonderful. Just wanted to cover that. Okay, do we have a motion to send to public hearing?
Motion to send to public hearing.
Thank you, Hooper.
Second.
Second by Scott. All right. I think we've lost Frank again.
We did. Scott Taylor,
Aye.
Hooper Schultz,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Lisa Frazier.
Aye.
And Frank is still not here. I think I would feel a little bit better if we actually ask him to vote verbally when he gets back on both of the motions that we've had, just so that I can reflect those in the minutes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then for Saru and Bob, just to clarify, so we haven't agreed to anything or anything along those lines. What this is doing is this is sending it to public hearing for the public to have comment and input on and that sort of thing. So that's the step that we've just done for that particular item. All right, so moving on. Let me hop back. So we are now on the meat of the matter, which is the discussion of 4A, the Unified Development Ordinance text amendments to support waiver removal. This is why we are here tonight. So, Margaret, would you like to? This is basically starting on page 18 of your packets. What should be amended to remove waivers? So,
Right, and again, for our guests, the ordinance allows that when an applicant applies for a special use permit, which now are reviewed by the Board of Adjustment, if there is something unusual about their property or their use, or sometimes they just don't want to follow the ordinance, they can apply for a waiver. And in applying for that waiver, they can make an argument to the approving board that they shouldn't follow the exact letter of the ordinance and they could do it in a different way. So for example, a site has a low area that's perfectly suited to be their stormwater detention pond, but it is in the back corner of the property, and the ordinance would require them to have a buffer there, an undisturbed area. Well, they can't quite create this detention pond that is required by our stormwater regulations without doing some grading back into an area that's supposed to be tree preservation. They might come forward and say, if we agree to supplement that landscaping along that back property line to meet the standard of that type buffer, can it be narrower? Can we do some grading in the buffer? Can we do these things to allow the stormwater to be where it wants to be? And those are the types of requests that we get. Can we have one less parking space? Can we have 10 extra parking spaces because we know this is going to be a medical office and medical offices require more parking than maybe some of our other office uses, those types of things. And then they present a case through the public hearing process, and the advisory board, the board who has the determination authority, can decide to grant the waiver or not. That was the idea when we put these in more than 10 years ago. They've been abused a little bit. They've been used a lot of times as almost weapons of, we want this waiver, and if you don't grant our waiver, then this use that you desperately want in the community just isn't going to locate here, because we cannot meet your ordinance. We just can't possibly meet your ordinance, and without much more argument than that. And that's not a great place to be. No one likes to be there. And so staff is suggesting that we do away with waivers and get folks on the straight and narrow of meeting the ordinance completely, but realize that there are certain sections where we see a lot of waiver requests, and in those sections, maybe we can build in some flexibility or adjust the ordinance a little bit to allow for the most common type circumstances, and find a way to move forward while still allowing folks to meet the ordinance, meet the intent of the ordinance, but have some flexibility. So we started this discussion last month. The bulk of the discussion was around dimensional requirements and residential density. Does the board have any interest in starting at the end and moving our way back, or do we want to tackle the hard one first?
So to confirm, when we say the back, we're talking like tree preservation?
Start with tree preservation and then work our way back to, we work alphabetically through the ordinance, do tree preservation, then sidewalks, then parking, then lighting, then buffers, and then come back to density? Or do we want to start at density and work our way forward?
Do the hard one first.
Okay,
Get it out of the way, just so we have the brain capacity to deal with that.
that's what my grandfather would say.
Does anyone have any objections? All right, I think the Scott motion has passed there, just on verbal consent, so.
Well, Frank has joined us and seems to have
Yes, we
audio
need
control
Frank.
and doesn't seem to be frozen right this moment. Frank, would you mind telling us your vote on approval of the minutes, please?
Yes, I
Thank you.
approve the minutes as they were. Thank you. Sorry, I switched over to an Ethernet cable and it seems to be better.
Okay. And then we also had a motion to add that item about the,
4.5.
yeah, actually, we didn't, that wasn't the adding, that was actually to send that text amendment
Public.
about emergency
public.
COAs to public hearing. Could you share
Aye.
your vote on that as well?
Yes, aye.
Thank you.
And I missed part of that, which I assume is just a part of emergency preparedness. That's why.
It is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And so then we're going to talk about setting, so again, the waivers that we thought are possible, we haven't actually seen very many waivers on the dimensional requirements or about residential density, but we haven't treated them as waivers because so many of our townhome and apartment communities have come in as special uses and have just asked for a particular density. And in the agenda packets, the board members received some information that shows what the current density is in a number of different apartment and townhome neighborhoods. And those that are shown in orange are the townhome neighborhoods, which you would expect to be at a lower density. The ordinance has been set at 9 units an acre for attached housing for a good number of years, although it was 6 units an acre when I started. And as you can see, a number of projects are above both 6 and 9 units per acre. And actually the current building, kind of what the market would request is something much closer to 20 or more units an acre. And we realize that it's hard for folks to visualize what that might look like. And the board asked for some examples. And so in your agenda packet, you have photographs of 3 examples. That would be Carrington at Perimeter Park, which is in Morrisville, which is built at about 16 units an acre. The Caraway Village, which is the newer apartments at I-40 and Eubanks Road, at approximately 24 units an acre. I say approximately because I did that based on, doing some calculation based on address points and creating a lot size. And then also the Chapel Hill North apartments on Perkins Drive behind the Harris Teeter, which are in the vicinity of 20 units an acre. And I bet that's Shannon. Great, thank you. It's hard for me to talk and do that all at the same time. So you'll notice in some of these examples, I also then sent more examples that I'll go into in a minute. You'll notice that in many of these examples, they are 4-story units. Our current height limit in the multifamily district is 45 feet. 45 feet will put you at 3 stories, not 4. So there is always the question of, do we change the height limit to, do we not? And so that is, I had not suggested that as part of this amendment, but staff did suggest changing the density to 20 units an acre. And then we were also talking about an automatic density bonus for proposals that were 100% affordable, with some sort of fixed program providing that funding. And then today I was able to send you, we had an intern in who did some additional research and found some more apartments. And so this is Cortland RTP, which is roughly 22 units an acre, almost 23. You can see those are 3-story units. Then these Trinity Ridge apartments in West Raleigh look to be mostly 3-story units. It looks like it's a fairly small complex at 19 units an acre. Then the Arboretum in Cary is more than 4 units an acre. I'm sorry, 4 stories at 23 units an acre. And Camden Place at 17, which is again back at the 3 stories in Mebane. So there's, and one last, Sanctuary at Powell Place in Pittsboro, again at 3 stories. I'm not sure that's a real photograph. I think that's a rendering of what they might look like. I'm not 100% sure that these are built, but that's at 17 units an acre. So just to give you some, a flavor of what things could look like, please remember that a lot of these are newer construction, so there's not a lot of tree preservation. The landscaping is not particularly mature. And so what you see over time is going to look a little different than what you see in the first couple of years. But by and large, you get a flavor for what the density looks like. And again, then it begs the question of 22 units an acre or 20 or more units an acre is really hard to get, depending on what the parking requirement is, without going to a fourth story. And aside from our height limit, then you have water pressure issues to get to the fourth story. And you also have building code changes when you go from 3 to 4 stories. And that's where you might start to see projects having to put in elevators. And that certainly changes the math and the affordability. So just wanted to throw those out as something for folks to look at. And again, the project here in town with the highest density is the 515 North Churton condos across the street from Town Hall at 15.5 units an acre. Some of our apartment complexes have really large open spaces that they don't have development on. So like the Cates Creek Apartments set aside almost 3 acres. And that helps them get their density, but it's 3 acres of green space that's left there with a conservation easement. So if you applied their density to the smaller parcel, it goes up a little bit. To put them closer to 16 units an acre. That set aside had more to do with stormwater, and they chose to set aside land since they had it and couldn't build additional units under our ordinance, rather than paying into the stormwater fund for nutrient loading.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what questions the members might have, but I think it's probably time for me to be quiet and let's get some discussion.
Before you're quiet though, because I never want that. But before you're quiet, a little bit about, so we're talking about density, and we're talking about some of the different developed densities in town and that sort of thing. And maybe just a little bit about and this could be you or Shannon either way, but about the value of increasing the density and why it's necessary or why it's not necessary or whatever the case may be, because it's a change, right? You mentioned how we have, as a town, historically had it at 6, then it went to 15 and that sort of thing. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
I'll let Shannon capture that part, and I'll stay focused on the affordable part when we get there, because she's much more fluid in the current market.
So in my role here with the town, I have historically done, with regard to planning, economic development planning. And I have met with more than one developer in the last year who is really excited about a project. They want to do townhomes, or they want to do a multifamily apartment or a condo project or a mix. And once we get to the fact that our current max density is somewhere, Margaret, it's like 9 or 10 units per acre, they kind of like, you can hear the brakes squeal and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean I can only get 10 units per acre? And that is just very low. As you've seen from the examples, I mean, we've got apartment complexes that can get up to 20, 23 units per acre in other jurisdictions, not all that far from us. And really the market, because of our land prices and our tax values here in Orange County, the market really can't sustain that low of a density. So really, a lot of the developers need to get somewhere between 12 and 13 at the very lowest units per acre, and really ideally want closer to 16 or more units per acre in order to make the project feasible, right? So when you think about a development project, you have to buy the land, so there's that cost. And then you have to, develop your infrastructure. You have to bring your roads in, your lighting, your stormwater. And this is even before you even get to the cost of building the buildings, pulling the buildings up. And all of that cost, if you can't get enough units per acre to pay for the project, then you're not going to do the investment, right? So like developers build projects to provide good housing and to provide nice projects, but they also need to be able to pay for them and hopefully make a little bit of profit off the top. So if they can't even break even, let alone make a profit, then they're not going to endeavor to engage in that development project. So I would just say that generally, compared to our neighbors in other jurisdictions, our density is just very low. And we're missing opportunities for housing projects, potentially that include affordable pieces.
And then last week we talked, or not last week, sorry, last month, it feels like last week. Last month we talked also about the value of a differing housing stock a little bit. Do you mind, I'm still a little foggy on that one, if you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit too. Sorry, this meeting shouldn't be all about me, but here we are, so.
No, it's fine. So one of the things that you really want in a livable, sustainable community is a variety of housing stock. So for example, a town comprised entirely of single family, large lot detached houses is not going to be as rich in culture or diversity as a town that has different kinds of houses. One size does not fit all when it comes to housing. I'm sure if we polled everybody in the room right now, we all probably live in slightly different housing situations. So you have to offer housing availability for people in various walks of life, whether it be young business professionals, families, senior citizens. Everybody kind of has a different preference on how much maintenance they want to do inside or outside. Some people love living in apartments. They could buy a house twice if they felt like it, but just really enjoy apartment living. So we want to make sure that we have diverse housing stock. And this also speaks a little bit to affordability and supply and demand. You know, one of the problems with affordability right now in our area is that we have a huge demand and not enough supply. And so by keeping the density low, we're further limiting that supply of housing in our market. I don't know if Margaret wants to add to that because she definitely wants to speak on the affordable housing portion of that.
Well, I also want to bring up a couple other points, just so the board, things that I know inherently that might not be obvious to the board. We have no vacant multifamily land right now. Everything that is zoned or approved for multifamily has been built on. So if we change this density, we're not going to surprise someone. You know, everybody has next to them what they kind of bargained for and what they heard about at the public hearing. A number of these apartment complexes are old. I'll just be honest. The Lori at Hillsborough has had about 6 names over the last 30 years. And I believe it was built in the 1980s. And you can see that it was built at 7.5 units an acre. By changing the density in that area, yes, you're going to make that land more valuable, without a doubt. And apartment land is some of the most valuable land in a jurisdiction. If you do your top 10 taxpayers in Hillsborough, a lot of them are your apartment complexes. That's just the way it works out. But that might also encourage some of these places where the buildings are really starting to be a little bit too old to redevelop. And then they could redevelop in a more intense way in areas that are already developed. So it's sort of another version of infill. Now, is that going to happen? Is us making this change going to encourage that? Is it going to displace people? I don't think anybody can guesstimate on that, but it will make the redevelopment of our aging apartment complexes more attractive to the investors, and it should help prevent them from becoming really questionable in terms of the quality or the livability of some of those communities, which could happen given the age of some of these. We've seen these complexes flip owners 2, 3, 4 times in the time that I've been here. West Village has changed hands, Lori has changed hands, Patriots Point, and that's one of the newer ones. That has changed hands about 3 times already. I think Heritage has changed hands at least once. And those types of things, I mean, it's normal in an apartment complex. They do cycle over every so often because people target different sections of the market. And some people just like to build apartments and you know, kind of like some people like to have new cars and then they trade them every 2 or 3 years. And some people just won't buy a new car for anything, but they like that used car. And so there's people who invest in the apartment complexes that have been around for just a little bit. And so this is another way that we can kind of help support some of these existing complexes that might be getting ready to consider redevelopment and help make sure that the redevelopment is both economically viable and provide something positive to the community. On the affordability side, I was proposing a 50% density bonus that would be automatic if the applicant was doing 100% of the dwelling units affordable. 80% AMI or area median income is a standard measure of affordability. So that it's very normal to use 80%. Most federal funding or other funding sources that support affordable housing aims at bringing that housing down so that it is affordable to folks who earn 80% of the median income. And affordability is determined that you would not spend more than 30% of your income for housing and utilities combined. And it's, while they do it on everything from a 1-person to like a 9-person household and calculate it out, the most often reported number is for a 4-person household. Going back to that, 2 parents and 2 children, kind of standard family. And then 30% of what that median income translates into a monthly rent, and so on and so forth. But there are programs out there that helps reduce the cost through either tax credits or direct investments or other things to keep the dwellings affordable. You may hear the elected officials talk about permanent affordability. That is not easy to accomplish. It's actually very challenging to accomplish. And the state tax credit programs and some of the other programs that make things affordable only guarantee it for a period of 20 years. And then there's a reinvestment, again, that sale of the apartment complex. And there are people investors actually out there that look for those resales of these apartment complexes and keep them affordable for the next 20 years. It doesn't happen every time. West Village Apartments is an example. It was developed under the affordable housing tax credits. It has sold. It is now market rate. So you're not always able to maintain that, but it is common to be able to maintain that. And so that's another incentive that's an incentive that doesn't cost the town any money for affordable housing. Affordable housing is very difficult to build. It's costly because new construction is costly. But if there's ways that we can make the process easier or cheaper or faster, that all of that translates into money for the developer, and it makes it slightly more attractive. And so by allowing additional density and allowing it by right so that it's automatic and there's not a protracted hearing process in order to get to it, those 2 things act as incentives for investors who are willing to build affordable housing.
Thank you, Margaret. Hooper, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret actually answered it. It was about all the multifamily lands are developed. And I was wondering what that meant for us. I do have another question that, Margaret, I think you kind of answered, but I just want to make sure I understand it. When or if a developer would redevelop this land and it becomes affordable and they're given the 50% density bonus, would that affordability mandate stay for 20 years regardless of who the owner is?
If they participate in the state tax credit program is the one that I'm most familiar with. And so those tax credits are sold, and that developer gets to take that money and buy down the cost of the project. And so that guarantees that the project remains affordable for 20 years. I am not aware of any way for somebody to take the tax credits, but get out sooner. I believe that is a full restriction. It's not something I can guarantee 100%, but I am pretty sure that it is fixed and that there's not wiggle room to get out of it. I don't think the owner usually changes in that period of time. I think the owner would probably stay put because the tax credits, but I don't think there is a bypass to the 20-year period.
Okay, thank you.
If a project is funded locally through like an Orange County housing bond or something like that, when Orange County puts money into a project, they actually require a 99-year affordability promise. And that's done through restrictive covenants and deed restrictions. So we haven't seen too many apartments get built that way, but some of our housing has been built that way.
Okay. Thanks for the question, April. Jeff, you had your hand?
Yeah, I think the changing it to the 20 units per acre makes a lot of sense. And I think the examples and the visual exhibits help out a lot, because I think that really helps kind of, give a sense of what would be. And I think that, increasing the density makes a lot of sense for the town, because it's not 20 units per acre based on the examples given is not that dense. I mean, it's not nobody's going to come and build a high rise or anything, at least in the near future for sure. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Okay. Frank, Scott, Lisa?
No, I think I was already there last meeting that it needed to go up. 20 units, it seems appropriate. I think we're artificially being locked down into 9 units. This seems, we don't have that luxury anymore. I think we're going to lose out on developers that want to come in, and it seems to make sense. I mean, and I think each project gets evaluated anyways on its own merit. So there's opportunities there in case something wasn't going to work out. So I have no objections to it.
Lisa, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just an interesting question. How did they come up with 20 units? Why not 15? Is there a mathematical reason for 20?
No, we really just looked at what others are using around and maybe pushed it just a little bit to what folks are building at this moment and not 5 years ago, to push closer to that 20 units an acre, even though it might be really hard for somebody to deliver 20 units an acre with our height limit. I would rather, and this is me personally, I think it's in the town's interest to make the density more flexible and inspire somebody to get creative on how to make the site work.
Right.
It might lead somebody to do parking underneath, or do smaller units, or do something to get them closer to that maximum, rather than saying, oh, well, the town's only allowing 16 units an acre. Maybe I'll pass them and go somewhere where I could maybe squeak in 1 or 2 more units.
Okay. Thank you.
Scott?
I'm good.
Yeah, I guess my thing is, so your examples had a lot of 20 and 21 units per. I guess my thing is, if we're offering a 50% bonus, you didn't have any examples of 30 units. So I didn't know, like, is there just not an example of 30 units per in our area kind of deal? Or I guess if we're offering that as a bonus, but no one does that, is it really a bonus kind of deal?
I would say, oops, staff focused on the 20 units an acre and forgot to look.
It's not that it's
Shannon,
not there, it's just.
Yeah, Shannon, if you'll talk for a little while, I will look and see if that book had something at 30 that I can slide on the screen real quick.
Okay. Shannon, how are the kids?
They're good. My son started kindergarten. I know she should talk. Talk about what, Margaret?
I'm so sorry.
I mean, I think with that density bonus, that is going to be a dense product. And I'm not sure. You'll definitely have to get creative to figure out how to get something that dense within the height limit. And Margaret, I almost wonder if we're going to offer the density bonus if we don't offer a height bonus with it so that they can meet the density bonus. Now that we're kind of talking through it, I hadn't thought about that before. But if you're going to build an affordable housing unit, maybe you get the additional height to be able to use the density bonus.
Yeah, we could. We also talked about, that we would reduce the parking, and that would free up a lot of space by allowing them to have less parking in an affordable unit than because they just don't need the parking, that they might be able to take advantage. And now I can't remember where I put those examples.
I have a comment.
Frank's comment.
Just in the last month, I've had 2 developers talk to me about the 45-foot height limit and wanting to explore how hard that was or how soft that was, understand the emergency vehicle issue associated with it. So I just want to add some credence to, I guess, what Shannon just said about relief from that. And but this actually had to do with in-town property and redevelopment, which of course they were just probing, and it was more their front people just coming in to talk about how receptive the town would be to sort of mixed use on Main Street, sort of, so to speak. And so I'm hearing that, from people who have no connection to Hillsborough, no connection to North Carolina. These are national people that are coming in a real estate syndicate asking about mixed use on Churton. So this stuff is, it's already hitting. And I think so it's interesting, the meeting we had a month ago about the 45-foot height limit. And I've had 2 independent questions, 2 different investor groups asking me about that at the same time. So I think people are well aware. They weren't asking about property outside. They weren't asking about multi-unit development. They were talking about mixed space, mixed use type development downtown, and if we were ready for it or not. So that's all, mostly a comment, just to add some credence to density. People are looking at us to get more dense here in town. I'm not sure what, they wouldn't reveal a whole lot. I didn't know who was behind these folks, the front people or not, but we spent a couple of hours talking about it.
Thank you for the comment, Frank.
I was trying to kill time for Shannon so she didn't have to keep talking.
Right.
I added some real world relevance, but congratulations on kindergarten.
Well, and that's another
Kindergarten?
another discussion point about, the redevelopments and so forth. Right now we do not allow multifamily by right in any of our commercial zones. So that means no apartments in Daniel Boone. And, whether we want to talk about that, we also still haven't gotten to the conditional zoning where we fully intend to have a mixed use zone that would encourage all of those things. And if a district like that and our commercial districts both have higher height limits, if you kept the same density carried over to when multifamily was developed in those zones, then you would be more likely to see it, and then it would be appropriately placed. It would be put in a place where you expect more density. I don't think that these examples are particularly great, but because they're very urban, very urban. And so unlikely to be what we would see here, some sort of a massive block of apartments. Again, that looks like it's probably 4 stories. And I'm sorry, these are small pictures that are difficult to zoom in on. Then you start to get into your mid-rises. This would be what would be most like something we would be likely to see. But it's probably 4 or 5 stories to get the 30 units an acre. I think what I was thinking of was mainly trying to pair it with the parking to give them just more building space and the possibility of having more units together. I am highly supportive of a higher height limit our highest height limit is 65 feet. You know, if you go to 60, that's a solid 4 stories. 65 would allow them to put at least some sort of slope roof. And I know everybody's like, wait a minute, 15 feet of floor. And yeah, because they need room in between for all the mechanicals.
Okay. Frank.
I forgot to add that the comment, the one of the things that they were, the poster child of the development for Daniel Boone would have been much like North Hills in Raleigh, that whole redevelopment that John Kane did. That mixed use, residential, business, then retail on the bottom. I don't think that's a secret to anybody, but I mean, that's kind of the idea, but that's certainly over 60 feet, those units there.
Okay. Any additional comments, concerns?
And again, this is not committing anyone. This is
Right.
sending it forward to public hearing. We know that we do not get a lot of comments at our public hearings about text amendments, but you know, given what we're talking about on this one, you know, we could reach out to the chamber, reach out and try and solicit a little bit of feedback. We could reach out to the company that is slated to build affordable housing in Collins Ridge and have them talk about what they need, what they're looking for to do, what they hope to do. And, you know, maybe solicit a little information on both sides to help all the board members of both boards understand kind of the needs out there in the market.
Sure. So one of the things that we expect to hear at the public hearing is something in regards to density and the character of the town and how this might affect that and how it's changing the feeling of Hillsborough. Is there anything that we want to say about that or anything along those lines or any kind of discussion that we want to have about that in regards to, you know, the Hillsborough has historically had 9 units per acre. And we're talking about increasing it by more than double, or at least the ability to. I mean, is there any kind of pre-discussion we want to have in regards to town character and that sort of thing?
Well, I think Margaret's point is well taken that there's no multifamily land left developable. And so folks who are near those complexes know what they're getting into.
Well, and I mean, I would, from a staff perspective, I would just say that especially the examples in your packet are still very suburban density apartments. They're garden apartments. These aren't like, I don't think pick up any, you know, like the Sky House in downtown Raleigh or anything like that. I mean, this is still pretty suburban development. So as far as the feel and the look of Hillsborough, if we plopped any of these examples on a vacant piece of land, I don't know that it would be as impactful as it may feel. Change is always going to be impactful and it's always going to feel different. But I don't know that one of these developments would change the landscape greatly. And with regard to the developable land, I mean, for full transparency, we could potentially get an ask for apartments at 85 near Hampton Point. We could potentially get an ask for apartments on the Owls Woods property, which is at the corner of 70A and 86. There's a big vacant chunk of land there. We could potentially get asked for more apartments or some type of an apartment product in addition to the commercial at Daniel Boone. We may get asked for apartments on 70. There's a lot of small property owners on 70 that are kind of getting together and trying to do combinations of land there. So just, I don't want a year from now for somebody to to propose an apartment complex there and say, you said we couldn't put apartments anywhere, because we do have some developable land where we could have an apartment developer pop up and say that they want to do that.
I guess I'll just add that Chris, when you were talking about sort of the look and feel of Hillsborough, I mean, I think we're talking now, I think we're talking of different parts of Hillsborough, South Hillsborough, Central Hillsborough, Historic Hillsborough. there's no place within the historic district where the main streets of King Street and Churton, unless some redevelopment, and it's probably bigger than us, happens with some of this retail space. So all of it will be on the outskirts, sort of like what Shannon was saying, outside of Hillsborough. So when I hear that question, it's like, how will Hillsborough change? I think it's got a center, and then I think there's going to be a South Hillsborough that's probably growing up through Daniel Boone, and it's going to look different. It already is looking different down on South Hillsborough Street. So I mean on Churton Street. North Hillsborough, the same, and just with the new development going out on 70 East, heading out towards Durham, the development out there with those homes across from the golf course. I mean, I think things are already changing. I think it's just adaptive, not necessarily negative. I think it's just adapting. But most people, when they ask me about, well, is Hillsborough going to change? And I'm like, well, what part of Hillsborough are you talking about? They're saying, well, downtown. Like, are you going to knock buildings down like they're doing in Raleigh right now? And I'm like, no, that's not done here. This is about preservation. This is about keeping things this way. And so, no offense, but there's not a Red Robin going to go in downtown somewhere, right? I mean, at that point, that's what they talk. That's what folks ask me in that question. That's what they're worried about. But I think they understand that with all this pressure on development, that things are going to change. And I guess it's just probably better to be on top of it, or at least forward thinking, like with density and where it's going to go. And I expect it to grow. It's a great community that's why everyone wants to come here. It's just a great community. And I just don't think we can close the doors to this type of development. It'll be smart development this way, I think. It's just that we have something to work on with like 20 units. But I don't ever see it maybe in my lifetime being downtown, but I could have a short life. I don't know.
Hope not.
Okay. Well, on that note, does anyone have any additional comments, questions, concerns in regards to the density? Does anyone? So the next step would be to send to public. I've got a waving. Hold on. Bob's got a hand. Bob.
Yeah, I know I'm just a visitor, but can I just, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to nod head, so yes.
I am a little concerned with what Frank just said, because even though we're talking about different parts of Hillsborough, it still does impact the downtown, as I mentioned, in terms of the traffic. And in the interview I had with Chris and Shannon, I mentioned that my commute to get from where I live, which is right near the high school, Orange High School, to get to 40 would be 22 minutes in the morning. And it only took me 13 minutes to get to Durham once I got onto 40. So it's all impacted. Also, in discussing, I did like what Margaret said about, certain areas where you could have an allowance on the feet, like in a mixed use area. But in talking about the areas that Frank mentioned, no one mentioned there's an area near where I'm not good with directions, but it's an area which I think is the poorest section of Hillsborough, and I don't think that's been mentioned. It's 70 near where the new jail is, all those streets, which looks like it's an area that is really in need of help in terms of housing. And of course, probably most developers wouldn't be interested because it's probably a big investment too. But anyhow, I mean, it seems like everyone's just talking about developing areas that really are where the most money is for developers.
Right, and Bob, I'll just, Hooper and I both live in that area that you're talking about.
What is it called? What is it called, Margaret?
Well, the Fairview area,
okay.
Both Northern Fairview and then larger Fairview. And so the town has had a plan for years to support the redevelopment in that area. The motor lodge that sits there, that's 5 houses from my house. I can't wait for somebody to finally convince that property owner to sell at a reasonable price and do something there. And hopefully that'll happen. I would love that to happen while I'm still employed with the town. But, it's coming slowly. We do see more inquiries along US 70 now than we did 3 years ago. But it's slow. And, in some ways, that's where the affordable housing in our community is left. And the price of housing in those two neighborhoods is starting to go through the roof, just like everywhere else. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. We would hate to see it push economically disadvantaged or other populations out, because that's where some of our diversity is. So it's a, we would love to see investment there, but those are where the tracks are much, much smaller. And it's harder to convince 5 people who all live next to each other to sell all together so that you have a couple acres to do something with. So
could incentives be given for affordable housing, mixed use? Like, could more incentives be given to developers in that area?
Incentives are a challenge in North Carolina under what we're allowed to incent. And the town has not done any incentive for housing yet. We actually haven't approved any for non-residential development, but our program is targeted and aimed at non-residential to improve employment. But it's a little bit difficult to set up that kind of a program, and the incentives that we can give are actually pretty small and won't necessarily move the needle. But it's certainly something that can be talked about. And I mean, and placement, making choices about where these opportunities exist under the development regulations is something that shows up on a tool called the Future Land Use Map that will be redone when we finish the comprehensive sustainability plan. So, we're doing these amendments now, then the comprehensive sustainability plan comes to talk to us about what the town should look like, in the near future. And then we work on that map to figure out where we want to incent through regulation or lack thereof, how you incent certain activities. And that's kind of what the next couple of years will bring to see what happens.
Thank you.
Teru?
Bob, thank you for opening the floodwaters. I have two concerns. One, I agree with you, Bob. The traffic is just horrible. The other thing is, how are we going to get the funds to develop the water and sewer system when we don't even have that now? And right now, they're talking $42 million if we wanted to build everything out, and we can't do that. The other thing is, we keep talking about this unit of apartments over here are low income, and this unit of apartments over here is low income or affordable income. Why not do mixed income? So then you don't end up with segregating incomes into pockets around Hillsborough.
We would love to do that. The developers don't love to do that. The banks, unfortunately, the banking industry controls a lot of things, and they will not lend money for those kind of projects. Even the affordable housing developers, when they come to us, yep, we want to build our 40 units right here. There's no way for us to figure out how to have 40 units within this 170 unit apartment complex. That's not, so no one has figured out the math on how to do that and make it work from a financial standpoint. And to your point about the utility system, that's one reason why we're seeing more development on the south side of town. As Saru said at the beginning, she's on the Water and Sewer Advisory Board. She knows where the basin is and knows which basin is in better shape than the other. And, unfortunately, Daniel Boone sits in the more struggling basin. And that is going to be one of the things that constrains development on the north side of town. And I'll just let everybody know, the elected board has had as a kind of unwritten policy for about 15 years to not see a lot of residential development north of 70. They know that Churton Street is congested. They know that they have not been willing to identify a bypass or a transportation solution. And so their solution to that is don't approve a lot of development north of 70, residential development. They would love to do some commercial development north of 70. So all of those people driving south from northern Orange County and the counties to the north of us would stop somewhere north of 70 and shop, but the market hasn't seen fit to do that yet. So there are policies at work to try and address some of the things that you guys are interested in. So it's kind of nice to hear that interplay. I just feel like I spend a lot of time educating people. So please don't take it as this is all stuff you're supposed to know and what's wrong with you. It's hard. It's a full-time job to know all of the ins and outs and how it all plays together.
I've been going on 5 years. I didn't know about the northern policy. So
Yeah,
okay.
we brush them off before they get to this board and discourage them from even applying.
I mean, even if there wasn't another stick of development today, all the things that you mentioned, Margaret, exist now.
Mhm.
The bypass, when the lack of sewer at this point anywhere north. There's a lot of things that even if we don't build anything, we have to resolve. And I know that that's a really hot topic, at least when I interviewed for the board, was the bypass. And we were doing traffic counts at the time, and saying, well, it's just those people from Virginia that come through here. And it's not, it's like 4% or whatever. It was a very low percentage. It's us, it's everybody else running down through Churton at the time. So, I mean, yeah, I think, and to Bob's point, yes, you're right. Any development anywhere is going to impact that traffic flow. That has gotten worse. I didn't mean to ignore that possibility, but I think it's coming from like someplace like Raleigh, where it's so developer friendly, where everything is like in a neighborhood that was like, oh yeah, knock that down, put 2 houses on one lot, put 3 houses on one lot, and don't worry about the schools that are being built and being overcrowded. I just don't think we were engaged in Raleigh at that time, and we didn't do anything. We didn't work part or didn't have a planning board that would prevent that sort of stuff, or at least be prepared for it. Our impact fees in Raleigh were like $400 a house, which does nothing for sewer, water, as you know, or school systems. I mean, it was woefully underfunded. So I realize we can't boil the whole ocean here on Hillsborough growth issues and stuff, but the fact that density, I think from 9 units, and just going back to where we started, I think going up from 9 to 20 is probably overdue. I think it's what I'm hearing. It is overdue. I don't know if it'll change the characteristics of the Hillsborough we know now that different, because I think there's points about the land has to set up for it, the location. There's all sorts of, I guess that's the most ideal it could be, Margaret, right? Is 20 units per would be a very ideal situation for a developer. And we just don't have that kind of land right now to suit that at this point available.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Saru, Bob, thank you also for your comments. Do we have any additional input on this particular one? Jeff, Scott, Hooper, any additional? Lisa?
No.
Okay. Do we feel like we're at the point where we have an appropriate thing to send to public hearing? Do we feel like we have the right number? Do we feel like we still need to chew on it? Do we feel like we need to move forward to get it down the court? Does anyone feel bold and brave?
I vote to move it forward.
Okay.
Second.
As is, correct?
As is.
Okay. So I have a motion from Frank, a second from Hooper to move forward with this item to public hearing as written at the 20 units per acre, including the additional 50% on top for affordable housing. Is that correct? Okay, so I'm getting some nods here from Hooper and Frank. At that point, I believe we are in need of a vote to move this to public hearing.
Frank Casadante,
Hey, no, just kidding. Aye.
Lisa Frazier,
Aye.
Chris Johnston,
Aye.
Jeff Scott,
Aye.
Hooper Schultz,
Aye.
Scott Taylor.
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, so the next thing that happens is that moves to public hearing. The public gets alerted, and then there is discussion. And then from there, it moves to, it moves to us again, or then it moves to town board at that point?
You got it. It comes back to this board for recommendation to town board.
and then town board. Cool.
So you're not done with this topic.
It's coming back a couple more times. It's like ping pong. Okay, so we are still in 4A, folks, and we've talked about that. We're now in buffers, I want to say. Is that correct, Margaret?
Yes, so one of the most commonly hit sections of our ordinance is the buffer section. We did make a lot of changes to buffers to grant some automatic flexibility, but the two sections that still seem to trip people up is the example I gave at the beginning, is when either utilities or stormwater ponds need to locate near the, oh good, I'm glad Shannon's doing that for me. That makes my life so much better. When either utilities or stormwater ponds need to go in those perimeter buffers. And so what this proposes is, the current language is basically, nope, you can't do it. Or not, no, you can't do it, but you really shouldn't do it. And there's not a lot of guidance around that should and shouldn't. And so what I did was go into, for utilities, we have four types of buffers. 3 are based on protecting adjacent land. The land that is not part of the development proposal. Most of the time, that is what is being protected. It's when something more intense is proposed next to something less intense, and that more intense development has to put some sort of perimeter buffer. That's the A, B, and C type. The type D buffer is more to protect the development parcel. A type D is when it's adjacent to an interstate or a railroad. And so what I was suggesting here is that, that the utility goes on the development side of the buffer, and then you still can put that buffer between the utility and the property line to still protect that adjoining property. Or if it's a type D, you actually push the utility to the outside and bring the buffer in, so you're still protecting the utilities and giving a preference to the type 1. If folks remember, and Shannon's going to go out and find it, I think. Folks remember that we created like type A 1, 2, 3, and 4, where you could either give a little bit of land and plant it really densely, or give a lot of land and plant it a little bit more sparsely. And so the 1 is the narrower option that is planted a little bit more densely. So I figured it was more likely that the developer was going to be able to make room to do that between his utility and the property line. Then I also created just a get out of jail free card for when the development plan is adjacent to or encumbered with an existing utility easement that they're not planning to do anything with. Sorry, this easement's on our property. We can't buffer it. We can't move it. It's here. We just have to work with it. And so this is you don't have to do anything. And then for stormwater, it's basically the same as for utilities. Again, trying to put the buffer in where it's going to make the most sense and serve the purpose that it's supposed to be, protect the land that it's supposed to. And so I really think this language would probably capture the majority of our buffer waiver requests that there's some true need associated with, and not just stubborn or recalcitrant developers who want to do it their way. But this is a way, this gives them a path through that still protects the properties that need protecting and creates just a little bit more flexibility.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. Shannon, are you bringing something up additional or?
Well, I was just going to pull, Margaret, I'm not sure if this is a great example, but this is where you have the railroad, you've got a sanitary sewer easement in one of these buffers. Is this an okay example?
Sure.
So for example, the so you have these existing sanitary sewer easements and they make it really hard to locate your buffers because you can't exactly move a sanitary sewer easement because the sewer line is under it. And so it makes it, you kind of have some conflicts sometimes. And I think I saw another one here somewhere. You can see my screen. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jerking around a little bit. Here's another one, a 20-foot landscape buffer where you may or may not have your stormwater feature that kind of encroaches into that.
And so again, in this case, the property to the bottom of the screen, all those little things you see on the screen, the numbers with the blues and the greens are lots. This is actually Collins Ridge. And so that adjacent land on the lower part of the screen is Daniel Boone. Well, Daniel Boone is most likely commercial. So this is a case actually where what is being developed needs the protection because it is unlikely to be residential on the other side of that buffer. It's going to be commercial. And so they are protecting those future homeowners. Now the commercial is going to have to put in a buffer when they get there too. So there's going to kind of be a double there. But if you can go back up to the other side of the development, Shannon, where the railroad is, and there's the interstate, you can see that perimeter trail being worked in, and you know this language would allow the applicant to then bring the buffer inside development side of the interstate and put the buffer there, or inside of the railroad and put the buffer there, where it's going to do the most benefit to the people who are being protected. I mean, we're not protecting the railroad from having houses in its backyard. The railroad doesn't care. But having an opportunity and or requirement for those trees to be installed closer to those homes does more to protect those homes from the sounds that come from the railroad and the interstate.
All right, do we have any questions in regards to buffers? Is there ever a point where the buffer can come in too much to try to avoid the utilities or anything along those lines? Is that an issue or concern?
Well, what we've done, we used to allow the buffer to be a portion of the development parcel. And we realized that that really didn't work so well because homeowners would end up with land and their backyard would be all designated buffer, but no one would tell them. And next thing you know, they're out there cutting trees or doing something, and you know, nosy neighbor is calling and saying somebody's cutting down all their trees in their backyard, and we go look in the file and yeah, oh darn, you know, that's a buffer, you're not supposed to do that. And then the homeowner's like, what? I didn't agree to that. And so it becomes an issue. So now for residential properties, the buffer is outside. It's open space. It is in the homeowners association's hands, which has made it a little easier to manage these in the long term. Sometimes still commercial sites will have buffers on their individual parcel. But none of our buffers are more than 100 feet. And the only one that's 100 feet is that type D. Everything else is like 60 feet or less. And there's like 4 options of, well, if it's 20 feet wide, then you have to build a really tall fence and some trees. And if you go to 40 feet, then you don't have to build the fence, but you still have to put in trees. And if you go to 60 feet, then you just put in fewer trees. And you don't have to build a fence either. So there's different ways to get to the same sort of protection. And like I said, none of the buffers, except the ones for the interstate and the railroad, are more than 60 feet. So I don't think that would be an issue. And it's a choice. The developer has a choice on how to meet the standard.
Okay. Does anyone else have a clarifying question on the changes to the buffer, making it more other side aware? Not seeing anyone jumping for their mic. Does anyone have a feeling about sending this to public hearing as written? Does anyone want to go home tonight?
I'll move to send to public hearing as written.
And I second that. Lisa, you may second that.
I think Lisa got it. Sorry, Frank. Hooper with the motion, and Lisa with the second.
Okay, Frank,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
and Scott.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Point of clarification. So all of these are going to go to public hearing on the same night. Is there a concern that, I don't know, is there a concern that that's a lot for one night for the public? Oh,
I'll
man.
say what I said before. We get very little public input on text amendments.
Okay.
And in terms of managing development, these all need to go at once. If we are going to partner this with removing waivers, and that would be another text amendment that you can vote on when we get to the end. If we're going to partner this with removing waivers, these all need to be packaged together.
Okay.
And
just
I
thinking
know
about-
that the general public, I don't know how dialed in they are. Like if I stop somebody in Food Line and I said, hey, do you know what a buffer is? A development buffer is? I'm not sure that the average person would know. So I don't know how much public comment. Now we may have some developers come out either in favor or against, because basically what we're doing is to try and get rid of waivers. We're giving them a buffet of more options, right? Like instead of just sitting a plate in front of them and saying, this is what you get, and they're trying to they don't want to eat that for dinner. We're like, okay, well, if you don't like that, here are some other options so that we don't have to keep going through the waiver process. So I think the general public may care about density, but I'm not sure about these other things. Maybe lighting.
Yeah, I could see lighting and I could see density being the ones that, literally take all night, right? And so I guess that's my concern is everything else on top of it. I'll also point out that I know for a fact Margaret Houth goes to Food Line. So if you asked her about buffers. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into lighting real quick. Margaret, do you want to give us a quick synopsis here on the changes? Shannon, do you mind sharing your screen again? That was really helpful.
Sure. So the issue that comes up is that we have, minimum and maximum light levels. And then, but we don't allow for a lot of variation across the site. And so what happens is to meet the minimum lighting level, and again, this is in parking lots, in a parking lot of 1 foot candle. And I'll do my standard, if you've been to Walmart at night, that parking lot is roughly at 1 foot candle. So it's not really bright. Your average convenience store, gas station, is more like 30 to 50 foot candles under that canopy. So I think folks can realize that there's a whole lot of difference there. If I remember right, I think Dan Barker used to tell us that lighting was exponential. And so it's not just, 2 is not necessarily twice as bright as 1, it's more than that. And so what happens is on some smaller sites, to meet that 1 foot candle across their entire parking area, lights overlap. You have one light here as my arm, and here's the other light, and their light patterns overlap. And so here where my fingers are touching, it might be 2 or 3 foot candles. And then back closer to the pole, it's the 1 foot candle. And so I'm suggesting that we allow up to 25% of the parking areas to be not quite 1 foot candle, so that we don't get these pockets of super bright or so much extra lighting going on these parking areas. My favorite example, not to pick on them, is the condo development across the street. They did meet the 1 foot candle like everywhere. And the average parking light level intensity across their parking lot is more like 2 or 3. So if you want to see the difference, go drive through their parking lot at night. It is bright back there. And we hear that from the neighbors a lot. So this is an attempt to create some flexibility, but yes, we're aiming for 1. We're going to give you a little flexibility on that. We're trying not to have, going from bright to dark and dark to bright is really hard on your eyes. And so you don't see things as well. Your acuity isn't as sharp. As you get older, it gets worse. I'm learning that every day. And you're not going to see that dog or that deer or that child or that whatever that you then hit. On the maximum light levels, we had said that 15-foot candles was just the maximum. If that is bordering on glare, especially when it's in a sea of dark, to suddenly go to bright 15, your eyes pull your eyes away from other things. You're driving down the road, you look at the gas station, you don't see the guy putting the brakes on his car ahead of you. But yet there are certain uses that want that extra lighting, a bank drive-through, an ATM, motor vehicle sales. We all learned that going through the dealership that's proposed out by the sheets. There are certain uses that just want it brighter for safety, and that while I personally don't feel unsafe in the dark, there are a lot of people who do. And creating some flexibility on this use specific basis to say, okay, these couple of uses we know that they want and quote unquote need more light. We're going to allow you by right to get brighter, but you still have to get dark by your property lines. So you're still not encroaching on your neighbors. You might be a pocket of bright and you're going to draw somebody's eye, but you still got to knock it down when you get to the property lines as a kind of middle ground, because that was a challenge with the car dealership. And the board may not remember what they did, but and actually I don't have it right here in front of me, but you allowed them to have much brighter foot candles in their outside sales area, like 30 and 40 foot candles at different times of day. But there's not residential right there. So, it's going behind the sheets for those who are unfamiliar. And right now there's no residential there. Yes, there might be a hotel there. And they'll have blackout curtains. And if an apartment complex wants to go there, well, then those folks are just going to move there knowing that car dealership is there. But again, setting up these use type intensities, the attorney said was acceptable and would probably be, these two things together should address the majority of the light type requests that we normally see, or the inquiries and requests that we normally see, without giving away the farm and just making the town overly bright or overly dark.
Thank you, Margaret. Does anyone have any bright ideas on this one?
It's getting late.
I know, I'm so sorry. I do appreciate the one where, the hard stop on the property line. I think that's an important addition, and I'm glad that's represented. Does anyone have any feelings, strong or otherwise?
I'm going to comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, so I thought I probably have used all the words I could possibly do in 3 meetings tonight, but I know I'm usually silent, so bear with me. I'm trying to figure out just, the use of foot candle and the general public and the use of foot candle. And are they really going to do the machinations to figure out how many lumens that is and how bright that is? So I'm wondering if we really will get any comments on it at all. I realize professionals, this is what professionals use to measure items like that. Do we need any sort of corresponding examples, I hate to say it, for the public forum on this, if it's to go to public forum?
I'm more than happy to use the examples of, if you want to know what one foot candle looks like, the Walmart shopping center, and that your average convenience store is in the 30 foot candles range. And I feel pretty comfortable that those are accurate.
I think it would just be helpful because it's not in the vernacular of most people to talk about foot candle versus light spectrum. I can see, other terms that we use for that, street lights and things of that nature, but that's my only comment.
Yeah, and I probably need to say that this does not apply to street lighting, because street lighting is totally separate. This is only for parking lot lighting and walkway lighting on private property, not the public rights of way. And I wish you could get good photographs of lighting, but you can't. You really kind of have to go out at night and observe it and know what the math is, or know what the number is so that you know what you're looking at.
Yeah, other than that, I think it should, I understand this. I was just thinking about being on the receiving end of this in a public forum and going, what is an example of 1 foot candle? What will that look like to me at night at dusk? Or, that's all.
Happy to do that.
And to clarify for our guests, so the reason we can't do anything about the streetlights or anything like that, those are all Duke owned and operated. So there's not a whole lot of oversight we have over those. So
I heard the stories.
I learned about the blue light thing the other meeting, where if you see a blue light, that means it's about to fail. Had no idea. Every time I come to these meetings, I learn something new. All right, do we have any other additions from our group here? Jeff, Scott, does this feel right? Does this feel good?
Yeah, I think when we went through the car dealership, I think we kind of put out as many comments as we could on that. So I feel pretty good about this one.
Okay. Scott, any additional? You good? Okay. All right. This is my dramatic pause before we go ahead and move it to public hearing. There it is. Does anyone have a motion?
I make a motion that we send this to public hearing.
Lisa with the motion.
Second.
Frank with the second. Jeff will get it next time.
Scott,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Frank.
Aye.
Unanimous again. You guys are so agreeable. Thank you.
All right, so we are on to 613 parking. This one comes up a lot, actually,
Yes.
a ton. I'm actually surprised it's not a little higher up, just in terms of waiver requests.
Well, we've beaten on people pretty good about it, and it basically comes down to the fact that the ordinance has a fixed number. It recommends a fixed number for each and every use. It's not a range. So this is the number you should build and only that number. So when I used an example earlier of, now I've lost it because I'm watching what Shannon's doing, sorry.
Yeah, me too.
That a medical office uses more parking. A medical office may or may not be in a complex that is zoned exactly for medical offices. So it may not be in a building that was meant to be a medical office when it's proposed. And so medicine has changed over 20 years, and now they run so many more people through a doctor's office. The parking need at a doctor's office is a lot higher than anybody else's office, a lawyer or a regular office use or anything like that. And so that's one that I can pick on. Daycare centers are another one that I pick on. The daycare has really high peak parking needs, but not sustained over the day. And so trying to shoehorn uses into these fairly specific, but not completely specific categories in the ordinance doesn't always work well. And then you get into multi-use sites where, well, here's a shopping center. If these are all retail, then they're going to have a certain need. But if you mix in 3 restaurants, then it's going to be a different need. And if, oh my God, they all go office, then you don't need all that parking. And so I tried to figure out a way to create some flexibility and rounding in what they could do. And so I'm suggesting that we get away with the word minimum, just strike it out. And then say that the number generated by applying the standard is the required number. And then the ordinance has rounding conventions that, if if you apply the math and it says 16.5, then you have to build 17 parking spaces. But if it's 16.4, you only have to build 16 parking spaces. And then last time we talked about whether they could have a percentage more or a percentage less, and that seemed a little scary. So I just picked out of a hat, because very few of our uses get up to needing 100 parking spaces, allowing them just 5 more or less, and then 100 spaces, they can have 10 more or less. And that gives some flexibility. It gives the bigger uses or the sites where there's probably more variety of use a little bit more flexibility, but it's still not a big percentage either way. So if they're 100 spaces or more, we're only giving them at most 10% flexibility, because they can have that 10 extra spaces or 10 more or 10 less. If they're required to have 300 spaces, that's nowhere near 10%, because they're still stuck with the 10. Because we don't really want to encourage people to be building extra parking, because we would like to hope that maybe someday folks will be able to walk and bike and do other things then take a car. But it provides some flexibility without creating too much flexibility. And then back to the affordable housing issue, we had talked about going with the 1 parking space per bedroom rather than the 2 per dwelling unit, just because the likelihood, it's just more likely that those households are going to have fewer cars, as a kind of a reinforcing incentive for affordable housing. So there's two sections here.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. Do we have any questions? Margaret, in regards to the requiring 99 or fewer spaces, allowed to build 5 more or 5 fewer, is there a floor to that? Like, is there any kind of 5 fewer or minimum of any kind of language like that?
I wondered about that, and I just couldn't come up with another number to suggest, or whether to apply a percentage. I thought I would leave that for our discussion tonight. That's 5% if when it's fewer than 30, 40, 50, whatever number, and the board just wants to set it at 5%, at a flat 5% at those lower numbers, because let me get a calculator real quick. If a site is only required to have 20 parking spaces, which that's not uncommon. If
it's a 25%,
5% is only going to get them 21 parking spaces.
Yeah.
So how much difference is there between allowing that space that our ordinance says they needed 20 to build 19 to 21 versus building 15 to 25?
I didn't know if you could add like a not to exceed, an 80% reduction in parking spaces allotted or something like that, or some language like that would prevent it from just going in and saying, like, I'm going to go ahead and lop off, all of them or whatever,
Yeah. We could add so that uses requiring 99 or fewer are allowed to build 5 more or 5 fewer, so long as that new number does not exceed or reduce their parking construction by 50%. The language might need to be a little better, because I can hear my senior planner having a twitch right now, saying that I can't read a sentence like that. So we might need to take a little license, but if that's the concept that you're aiming at, we can figure out a way to craft it between now and the public hearing.
Well, and push back if that's not a concern, right? Like if it's a small enough development that they're talking about 5 spots anyway, or 10, 15, 20 spots, like, are we concerned that they could drop down to 5 less? Like,
Well, when you're talking about redevelopment, you could, let's use Steve's Market across the street.
Okay.
So Steve's Market used to be a convenience store. They actually used to have gas pumps.
Mm.
Now that was a long time ago when there were a lot fewer people in Hillsborough, so it didn't really cause a traffic issue. The town did build that truck pull-off space that is now used for about 3 parking spaces to accommodate their delivery trucks. A number of years ago, that was actually a Shapes gym. Is that what it was called? The gym for women that was only women. And let me tell you, when they had a class, it was way worse than lunchtime when Steve's is there. It was way parked full. And so now Steve's is, if Steve's wanted to convert to an actual sit-down restaurant, they might really swamp. That might not be an appropriate use for that site with that big of a building on it and that little space. And so you might want to put some sort of threshold on it like that. You know, and 50% might be better than 80%. I would hate for somebody to be able to get as far as 80%. But 50% might be reasonable to keep people, you know, kind of in close proximity and touching distance of what the ordinance standard actually is.
Okay.
Shannon, do you have thoughts about that?
No, I mean, we rarely see people want to underpark sites. The only thing I can think of is maybe some type of adaptive reuse or some type of a redevelopment, but even still, you want to be able to park people. You don't want people to be scrambling to try and find a place to park, to patronize your place of business. Like, it's just not good business. A lot of times what we see is the over parking, right? Like the big box retailers and the grocery stores, and everybody kind of want to over park.
Well, Colonial did a, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. But I see what you're saying, because if you do have a small user that maybe only needs 10 parking spaces, well, now they've decided they're only going to put in 5, but we know that they need those 10 and maybe even 15, then I think that's valid. I think that's a really good comment, actually, and something that we should think about.
With Colonial, they did the thing where instead of providing parking spaces that were new or anything like that, they rented a lot and said that they were going to ship people in and out and that sort of thing. And they probably would have enjoyed having to provide fewer parking spaces, less so than that, so that they didn't have to shuttle, because they relied a lot on the deck. They relied a lot on that sort of thing. So I could see something like that happening where, you know, you'd want fewer parking spaces to the point where, hey, I don't even have to worry about this now, right?
Well, and we might need to say that flexibility isn't available to somebody who's taking advantage of other flexibility that we have in the ordinance for offsite or shared parking, because that would beg the question of maybe they're not providing anything and they really need to.
Well, and this parking standard doesn't apply in downtown, right?
It would have applied to Colonial Inn because they were rezoning and they were building an addition. So both of those things. If it was Antonia's, for example,
yeah,
that's just changing out to another use, or let's have more fun. Let's make dual supply a restaurant. If they're not building an addition, they don't have to build parking. But because Colonial Inn was rezoned to central commercial special use and they built additional square footage, they did have a little bit of a parking load, but they did satisfy it offsite. So we can work on that and bring something back to the public hearing. And remember, we can always change the language based on what we hear at the hearing, or just people thinking about it a little bit more over time.
Does anyone else have any comments on regards to the parking as written? Comments, concerns?
Would it be those that are maybe required to have 20 or fewer spaces? Is that about the right place where people start to get a little nervous? 50, 10? Staff, take your best guess.
Somewhere around 20 or 30 sounds right. I mean, there's a big difference between having 30 spaces. There's not a big difference between 30 and 25, but there's a big difference between 20 and 15. I feel like you get down there and it's like, again, not that I think a whole lot of people would take advantage of the reduction in parking because you just don't see it very often, but.
Okay. So 20 then. Does anyone have a motion in regards to the parking? Hooper, you look like you want to. Do it, Hooper.
A motion to send it on as is.
Second.
Motion with a second from Jeff.
Frank,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Hooper.
Aye.
Scott.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, we're on to the second to last one, which is sidewalks. Sidewalks. Margaret's gonna take us home.
Right, so this one is predominantly trying to address the street tree issue where street trees and utilities compete for space. And so all we're doing is suggesting that there be some language that, so the standard is install the shade trees to create shade on the sidewalks 10 feet behind the sidewalk and spaced no greater than 40 feet on center. Well, sometimes you can't do that with the utilities. And maybe it needs to be back more than 10 feet. Maybe it needs to be closer than 10 feet. Maybe they need to be more than 40 feet on center. And so we just said varied spacing may be approved by the permit issuing authority when there's conflicts between the utilities and the street trees, but the number of trees cannot be reduced. And then adding language that the trees must be located between the building facade and the street to qualify as street trees. Just seems to go without saying, but you never know. And then for the buildings that are built up at much closer to the street, putting that same flexibility in.
Okay. So providing additional flexibility, the permit issuing authority, we're talking about staff, right?
It might be the Board of Adjustment, it might be staff.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's why we use that lovely term, permit issuing authority, to cover both.
Gotcha. Okay. Does anyone have any issues with the additional flexibility to address the issue?
This just seems like a common sense approach to it. So it looks good as it is, I think.
All right. Frank's putting a period on this sentence. Anyone have anything else, or are we good? Okay. Does anyone want to? Frank, do you want to?
I'll move to send this forward to public hearing as written with no changes.
Thank you, Frank. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Scott with the second, Jeff almost. Margaret?
Scott,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Frank,
Frank?
Aye. Sorry.
thank you. Where there's sticklers, we really do have to hear it. That's unanimous. Moving on.
All right. This is the last one for the night. Tree preservation. Margaret?
And so in this one, when we first wrote the ordinance, we stuck some standards in there knowing that they needed work and have never completely gotten back around to them. And I'm learning more as Shannon and Stephanie are working on the sustainability plan that there are two benefits to, well, there's tree preservation and then there's tree planting, and both are really important. And so in some ways, I'm doing a sort of cop out here, saying that we're probably going to learn a lot more when we get through the sustainability plan. And so maybe now is not the moment to pick a standard when we don't know as much as we should know. And just say, we're going to make people tell us what they're doing. Make people tell us what they're taking out, what they're preserving, and do a sort of calculation based on the, well, no, actually not do a calculation, but give us the area. And we're going to give extra, we're going to allow them to calculate trees that are preserved at closer to their actual horticultural ideal, I'll say. So if you plant a new tree in the middle of a field where it gets lots of sun, can get lots of rain, doesn't have anybody stepping on its roots, driving over its roots, ruining it, that tree is going to get to a certain size. Horticulturists will be able to tell you the width and the height so that you can calculate a circumference of the shade on that tree. You take that same tree and you plant it in a parking island. It doesn't get that big, ever. If you build up to the edge of a tree that's already there and start to encroach in its canopy a little bit, or even at the edge of its canopy, you slow down its ability to grow. And so in the tables back with the South Churton Street buffer, we had points that were assigned to the different tree types based on that coverage area. And we allowed preserved trees to be closer to that horticultural ideal, and newly planted trees were discounted about 50%. And I still feel very comfortable with that. And this is a funny story, but so Walmart was built around 2003. I've been in my house since 1996. I have trees growing in my yard that are the same variety of oak that are in the parking lot at Walmart. I had a volunteer tree pop up when I wasn't paying attention, and it is huge. But I can guesstimate that it was about 2000, 2003 when it started growing. And when it got past the point where I could go get it with a pair of loppers, and I just said, we're going to let the tree grow. That tree is way bigger by easily 50% over those trees that are in the parking lot in Walmart. So non-scientific example, but I feel pretty comfortable with my 50% math that we've used at other places in the ordinance. And so all we're saying here is, we're not telling you how many trees you have to protect. We're not telling you, well, I mean, other places in the ordinance tell you how many trees you have to plant, but we're not trying to limit that. We just want you to document for us what you're doing to the environment. What are you taking away? What are you giving back? Knowing that when we get on the other side of the comprehensive sustainability plan, we'll be in a much better place to then actually come up with, well, you really need to do better. Or you need, well, what we did is, all we need to do is hear what you need to do. We don't really need you to do the math. But I think we're probably going to want to have some sort of a standard. But this is tree preservation versus tree planting versus, smart growth and compact development. These things are in constant opposition to one another. And so you've really got to, we really need that plan to tell us, what is it that we want to do? What do we value more than anything else? And then what are we willing to be a little bit flexible on? And so to get us through a couple of years, I'm suggesting that we just get good information about what's being removed and what we think the site is going to be like after it's been replanted. So not really tree preservation, but tree information as sort of a placeholder that we will come back and put something more in about preservation and try and incentivize preservation and balance it with new tree planting, since both are important and both provide different benefits.
Okay. Thoughts?
I'll just say this was the one section we didn't get to last month, but it was the last one that we needed to do. Is probably one of the trickier ones, so I just went ahead and threw something out there.
Sure. So just to synthesize here, but what we're doing is we're jettisoning the requirement that you maintain a certain amount of tree coverage, right? So a developer could come in and catalog each tree and then blast them all out. Not that they necessarily would, but they could at this point, as written, just knock them all down, right? And
Yes.
we're taking out the sites with pre-development tree coverage and all these other requirements, and we're just removing that. And you have to give us a list of, the trees that you're knocking down for the 2 to 3 years in between now and the sustainability
Right,
plan.
and before anyone panics, that by the time a site meets our requirements for street trees, parking lot trees, and all the landscaping requirements where we require trees to get put back, if memory serves, that gets you about 10% tree coverage on most lots. So, I mean, it's not great, it's not a lot, but it allows for compact development and allows us to put the development where we have the infrastructure. And so there's some, offsets there to balance.
But those are new plantings and additions and not a retention of the existing trees and that sort of thing.
Well, some of it is retention because it costs money to knock a tree down. So people aren't knocking trees down when they don't have to.
Sure.
But these percentages that were in there about if you're between 25 and 50% wooded, then you have to stay in that 25 to 50% range. That can be hard for folks. Even having 25% and then telling them they have to keep 25% tree coverage after they've built their building. That's really hard to do. Especially on the smaller sites that are coming in for redevelopment. It's not necessarily so hard if you've got a 5-acre tract, but some of our development sites are less than an acre, and that's just not a lot of room to work with by the time you're meeting all of our other requirements.
Okay. Does anyone else want to speak for the trees? I can do this all night.
Saru does.
Saru, there you go. Thank
I
you.
just have a quick comment. Margaret, I didn't know Walmart's parking lot had trees.
It does.
Those are
I'm
the
going to have
little-
to try to look for them because
In all those parking lot islands, there's, I would bet that there is at least 30, if not 50 trees in that parking lot.
yeah, they're trees, but I know that they're really tiny. So I am concerned about trees that have grown very large and they knock them down and then they plant something that we know isn't going to give the same amount.
Yeah, I'll back up what Saru was saying about, yeah, exactly. I mean, Margaret, your own story kind of amplified the tree preservation side of things where, well, I guess it didn't. I guess what it was saying was give it a place to grow rather than retain the.
Right,
Okay.
and so one of the things we did after Walmart was built is basically double the size of the planting islands. And the planting islands now have to be much larger than they did when this site came in. To try and hope that the trees have a little better chance.
And I think Walmart's a tough example because that's a really big development and it's very overparked. And so there's a lot of pavement out there. I think where tree coverage gets harder is if you have a 1-acre wooded lot and you want to put a Starbucks with a drive-through on it, right? And so if it's 100% wooded and you have to figure out how to put in 20 parking spaces, a 1,000 square foot building, a drive-through, and a stormwater pond, it's going to be almost impossible to do that much tree preservation and or replanting just because you don't have the land. So that's where I think we're getting the waivers coming in. And that's what we're talking about, right, is waivers. So people are like, well, it's not possible for me to take this 1 acre lot and get everything on there and maintain that tree canopy coverage. And I can't think of, Margaret, can you think of a wooded lot that was redeveloped or that was built on or redeveloped recently? I'm trying to think of or do we
We've had a lot of them and they've all come in and asked for waivers and they've all been granted. And, you know, somebody, you know, we've been beat up a fair amount on social media for Collins Ridge, but Collins Ridge was a tree farm. Collins Ridge, any trees that were on Collins Ridge had grown up in the last 10 years since the last time they timbered it, and has been timbered twice in my time with the town. So that was not old growth forest that you saw. And we've been beat up on Forest Ridge as well. But I mean, it is modern construction does not really go along with tree preservation. And I have yet to find an ordinance. I've looked at a number, and even Chapel Hill, who has been preserving trees for a very long time, doesn't have a very high requirement for tree preservation. And I couldn't find one for their commercial sites. They go into single family houses, which I do not recommend. And another thing that going this route helps us with is the tree preservation ordinances are under attack at the state level right now. And we may have to go to the state and get special legislation to be able to do this. This is no longer, or this is on the verge of no longer being considered part of normal planning and zoning, because some other communities across the state went too far. So we may have to go to the state and get specific legislation if we want to put in, you know, this language is fine because you're not requiring anything, you're just saying do the math. But if we go back to a preservation language, it is very likely, from what we're hearing out of Raleigh, that we're going to need to go for special legislation to do that.
Okay.
I think it was Reagan that said that the trees pollute.
Reagan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you too young for President Reagan?
I plead the fifth. I don't want to play this game. Okay. Do we have any other comments in regards to striking the tree site requirements and adding a calculation and reporting element? Does the tree board know about this? Are they going to come get us?
No, the tree board has jurisdiction over publicly owned trees.
Yep,
Trees in the public right of way and trees on town property.
Yep.
Not trees on private sites.
Okay. All right. I don't hear anybody else saying anything in regards to the trees. So we need a motion so that we can all leave. Lisa?
I make a motion that we send this to public hearing.
Thank you, Lisa.
Second.
Here's a second from Scott. I will say the one thing about missing Jen is that she is on the ball with these things. So, okay.
Frank?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Hooper?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Great. So it's not on the agenda as a vote item, and it was kind of the introductory language. I'm presuming that since the board was willing to send all of this language to public hearing, you're also willing for us to come up with the appropriate language to remove the waivers and go find all of that, the relative suggestions that are all tied to that.
Do we need to make a motion on that?
It would make me really happy, but it's not 100% required.
Does someone else?
Margaret said, okay, I would like to motion that staff, I guess.
We send the board wants to send the concept of removing waivers from the ordinance to public hearing.
Which you said.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Was that Hooper? Yeah.
Yeah.
Scott,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Frank,
Aye.
and that is also unanimous.
Okay.
And just
so-
remember, everything you voted on tonight, it's just going to public hearing. You're not committed. You'll hear what there is to be said and think about it for another month and then another month before it comes back to you for recommendation. So nothing is steamrolling.
Yep, tell your friends. All right, so we are now out of 4A and into 5A update. Board of Adjustment is Jen Sykes, I believe, and she is out, so we do not have updates for them. Parks and Recreation.
Right.
Lisa.
So last month we did not make quorums. We did not have an official meeting. We will have a meeting next Tuesday, however.
TBD. Staff.
Go for it, Shannon.
I was just going to update you all that Chris and I sent forward a appointment for a new board member to take over Toby Vandermark's former seat. So we did recommend Cassie Chandler, and the town board approved that recommendation and that appointment on Monday night, but we have not had a chance to get Cassie sworn in. She has a work-related conflict, I believe, for the October meeting, but she will be joining us in November. And then we do have our guests here for the ETJ seat that is coming available. And then we will have another seat opening at the end of the year for Jen Sykes' seat, I believe. So we're going to work towards trying to keep a full board as much as we can moving forward. And the only other staff update I was going to give Margaret was related to the resolution that we passed the other night. So Saru touched on this a little bit, but we are having some sanitary sewer issues in the north part of town. And when I say north, it's kind of like if you're looking at town and you draw like a line through it diagonally, and then the north is up there. So basically the just downtown 70 and the Allison Street, Mountain Road kind of area, and then kind of south of Daniel Boone is all in the river sewer basin. And our newish utilities director was noticing some problems in that sewer basin, and she hired a consultant to do some in-depth testing, and we are having some surging, which is basically when the sewer comes up above the levels of the manholes, which is not good for the environment or, the general smell of town. So this is happening not just like every day, but it's happening mainly with big rain events. And as we know, because of climate change, we're seeing a lot more of those big rain events. And so we're getting I&I, which is infiltration, and something else, which is basically
Inflow.
stormwater getting
Inflow and infiltration.
which is basically a fancy way for saying stormwater is making its way into the sewer system some way, somehow. And she, her consultant was able to pinpoint some specific areas where we're getting a lot more stormwater into the sewer system. But as it stands right now, we're kind of at a holding pattern for adding new development for at least the next 6 months until we can figure out and mitigate how that stormwater is getting into the sewer system. And we can't really add capacity, like let somebody build a 20 house subdivision and have all those houses draining the sewage into our system that's already kind of at capacity. So we're not saying never, we're just not saying right now. Just give us a minute to kind of figure out this problem. We're on a brief pause, and we're gonna hopefully pick things back up in the spring with development and redevelopment in that sewer basin. But it is a little bit of a setback. I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed doing economic development work for the last few years and then having somebody be like, whoa, whoa, stop. So it was a little surprising, but I'm glad we caught it before it became a major environmental issue. So, I mean, I would say that that's the positive. We are going to have to figure out a way to pay for these upgrades. And I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation. We have had some discussions about what we can do with developers to get them to essentially pay their fair share for growth and to make investments in our infrastructure and what we can legally require them to do in order to keep growing in a smart and a meaningful way and keep protecting that sewer system, because our water and sewer is really important. So not sure if I missed anything, Margaret. Oh, Frank.
Yeah, I heard never, Shannon. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't hear. No, what are the impact fees that we charge per unit, per development unit now?
I don't know that we have any impact fees. We have sewer and tap fees.
Yeah, we have system development fees that are for water and sewer combined. It's close to $10,000 a dwelling. And the way we describe that is to reserve capacity in both plants to treat the raw water and to treat the sewage. And that's what we charge for a standard household meter. And then it goes up dramatically for if you have a bigger meter, because so much more water can flow through it.
We don't charge any impact fees for schools or
No,
Orange County does it?
remember that the schools are a county function, so the municipality can't charge for schools. The Orange County did used to have a new home construction impact fee for schools that was thrown out in court a number of years ago. And so we no longer have that. And the town does not charge like for roads and things like other folks do, you know, in a subdivision. If someone chooses to pay what we call a fee in lieu of development, we might get an amount for recreation or amount for recreation or a sidewalk occasionally. But very few impact fees here. It makes calculating the costs very simple.
And for stuff that is on plan right now, Shannon, is going forward, but or are you pausing that as well in that basin?
We have capacity that is reserved for projects that are already in the works. So this would be something new.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional updates from anyone not listed? No. Okay. Then we are on the final item of tonight. Does anyone want to send us off?
Motion to close the meeting.
Hooper motions. We do not need a second. Thank you everyone for sticking with us through the end here. I know it was a long night, but I appreciate us getting it all done. So thank you so much. Not as much as Margaret appreciates it, but I appreciate it too. So
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next month.
have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Bob. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Good night. Thank you.